The girl screamed and I dropped everything. I had no weapon. I had no plan. I had a half-eaten ration bar in one hand and a length of coolant tubing in the other, and I was standing in a maintenance corridor on a station where nobody knew my name. 3 seconds ago, I had been minding my own business, looking for cheap ship parts in the lower market ring of Valithar Station. Now I was running toward the sound of a child in danger, and every rational part of my brain was yelling at me to stop. My name is Jack Mercer, former Marine with the United Nations Space Command, current owner and sole operator of a beat-up cargo hauler called the Nomad, which was sitting in Docking Bay 47 with a blown coolant seal and no money for repairs. I had limped into Valithar 3 days ago, half broke and fully out of options, and the station's owners, the Selvari, had made it abundantly clear that I was not welcome. The Selvari are tall, 8 feet on average, silver-skinned, and covered in bioluminescent markings that shift color with their emotions. They build empires the way humans build sandcastles, except their empires last for millennia. They look at humans the way you might look at a fruit fly that landed on your dinner plate. Tolerated. Barely. I had spent 3 days on Valithar experiencing that tolerance firsthand. Shopkeepers would not serve me until every Selvari customer had been attended to. Guards watched me everywhere I went, their hands resting casually on their weapons as though I might steal something at any moment. A docking official had told me to my face that my ship was lowering the aesthetic standard of the bay. I ate my meals alone in the Nomad's cramped cockpit, looking out through scratched plexiglass at a station full of beings who considered my entire species an embarrassment. My father used to say that the universe does not hand you trouble. You walk into it with your boots on. He was a cargo pilot before me, ran the Jupiter-Saturn corridor for 20 years, until his ship gave out the same week his heart did. He never left the solar system, never met an alien, never stood on a station where the air tasted like starlight and the walls glowed with a language he could not read. But he understood something fundamental about the human condition. We do not look for trouble. Trouble is simply what happens when you are a small creature in a big universe and you refuse to look away. But none of that mattered right now because the scream came again, and it was a child and I was already moving. I rounded a corner into a service corridor that reeked of coolant and rust, and I saw them. 3 Drakari mercenaries, reptilian, green-scaled, each one easily twice my mass, with thick forearms and mouths full of teeth that could bite through steel cable. They had a girl backed against the wall. She was Selvari, young, maybe 10 years old in human terms. Her silver skin was pale with terror, and her bioluminescent markings were flickering wildly, the way a human child's hands would shake. One of the Drakari had a device clamped to the wall that was cutting through to an exterior maintenance hatch. They were dragging her toward it. The girl saw me first, her eyes locked onto mine, wide and desperate, and in that moment I thought about Lucy. Lucy was my younger sister. She died on Mars during the colony riots when I was 19. A crowd surged through our housing block and people were trampled and nobody stopped to help a 12-year-old girl who fell down in the crush. I was 60 miles away on a work detail, and I did not get there in time. I have carried that weight every single day since. I was not going to carry another one. I threw the ration bar at the nearest Drakari's face. It bounced off his snout, and he turned toward me with an expression of pure confusion. In that half-second, I grabbed the coolant tube in both hands and swung it like a bat directly into his jaw. The tube buckled. His jaw did not, but it got his attention. What happened next was not heroic. It was not graceful. It was the ugliest, most desperate 3 minutes of my life. The first Drakari lunged at me, and I ducked under his grab and drove the bent tube into his throat. He gagged, and I stomped on his knee with everything I had. I felt something pop under my boot, and he went down screaming. The second one caught me from the side. His claws raked across my ribs, and the pain was blinding, like someone had pressed a hot iron against my skin. I stumbled, hit the wall, and he came at me again. I grabbed a loose panel off the corridor wall and smashed it into his face, then headbutted him when he staggered back. That hurt me more than it hurt him. My vision went white for a second, and I tasted blood. But humans do something that confuses other species. When we are hurt, when we are cornered, when our bodies are screaming at us to stop, something switches on inside us. Some ancient wiring from a million years of evolution that says, "You are not done yet. You are never done. You keep going until your heart stops, and even then it is not a sure thing. I grabbed the second Drakari by his equipment harness and used his own momentum to slam him into the wall. The gravity panel on the floor gave me an idea. I dragged him over it and kicked the emergency override, spiking the local gravity to 3 times normal for exactly 1 second. He dropped like a stone, and his leg crumpled beneath him. The third one was smarter. He had a blade. He circled me slowly, watching me bleed from the gash across my ribs, watching me favor my left side where the second Drakari had dislocated my shoulder. He was calculating. He knew he was bigger, faster, better armed. He did not know about humans. He lunged. I did not dodge. I took the blade on my forearm, felt it bite deep into muscle, and grabbed his wrist with my good hand. I twisted my body into him, used his own weight against him, and brought my elbow down on the back of his skull. Once, twice, 3 times. Each hit sent a shock up my arm, and each hit was fueled by every single thing I had left. He crumpled. The first one, the one with the ruined knee, was crawling toward the breach in the wall. I grabbed the second one's blade off the floor with slippery, blood-soaked fingers and pointed it at him. He looked at me, looked at the blade, and decided his life was worth more than his paycheck. He dragged himself through the breach and was gone. I dropped the blade. My hands were shaking so badly I could not have held it anyway. The corridor alarm was screaming now, red lights washing everything in crimson. The girl was still pressed against the wall. She was staring at me with those huge silver eyes, and her bioluminescent marks were cycling through colors I did not know the names of. I tried to smile at her, but I think it came out wrong because my face was covered in blood. "It is okay," I said, and my voice sounded like gravel. "You are safe now." She did not run. She walked toward me, slow and careful, and then she reached out and touched my hand. Her fingers were long and cool against my skin. "You are hurt," she said, in perfectly accented Galactic standard. "I have had worse," I lied. The corridor flooded with bodies. Not regular security. These were soldiers in white and gold armor, carrying weapons that hummed with energy. Their movements were precise and coordinated, and they surrounded us in seconds. Royal sentinels, the personal guard of the Selvari crown. I did not know that yet. I did not know why they were here, or why there were so many of them, or why they looked at the girl like she was the most important person on the station. Because she was. One of the sentinels stepped forward, took one look at the 2 downed Drakari, then looked at me, a single human, bleeding from a dozen wounds, standing over the unconscious bodies of 2 creatures twice his size. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the attempt to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she believed about my species. The math did not add up for her. It would not add up for any of them for a long time. Another sentinel was examining the breach in the wall where the 3rd Drakari had escaped. A third was scanning the maintenance corridor for additional threats. They moved with the precision of soldiers who trained for this exact scenario, except the scenario had never included a bleeding human standing in the middle of it looking confused. "The princess," the first sentinel said. "Is the princess unharmed?" "Princess." I looked down at the girl. She was still holding my hand. "I am fine," she said. Her voice was small but steady, and she did not let go of me. "This human saved me." "Princess." I had just picked a fight with 3 armed mercenaries to save a princess. Not just any princess. The sentinel commander was barking orders now, and more soldiers were pouring in, and I caught fragments of words I recognized. Heir. Only daughter. The queen. The queen's daughter. I had saved the only daughter of the supreme ruler of the Selvari Dominion. My legs gave out. The adrenaline was gone and the pain came flooding in, all at once, like a dam breaking. My ribs were on fire. My arm was numb. My vision was narrowing to a dark tunnel. The last thing I heard before I blacked out was the girl shouting. She was gripping my hand with both of hers now, pulling at me, screaming at the soldiers in Selvari. "Do not let him die. He fought for me. Do not let him die." And that is how I went from a nobody cargo hauler with a broken ship and empty pockets to the most complicated political problem the Selvari Dominion had seen in 10,000 years. I woke up in a room that should not have existed. The ceiling was made of living crystal, pale blue and shifting like water seen from underneath. The walls pulsed with a soft luminescence that changed with my breathing, growing brighter when I inhaled, and dimming when I exhaled. The air smelled like rain on cedar wood, clean and deep in a way that station air never is. There was no hum of machinery, no rattle of life support, no vibration of engines, just silence so complete it felt like a physical thing. I was lying on a surface that was not quite a bed. It was warm and it seemed to adjust itself to my body, cradling every injury with a gentle pressure that dulled the pain. I lifted my hand and stared at it. My forearm, the one the Drakari blade had opened up, was smooth. Not just healed, smooth. The scar from the shrapnel hit I took on Callisto when I was 23 was gone. The burn mark on my wrist from a coolant leak on the Nomad last year was gone. My skin looked like it belonged to someone who had never been hurt in his life. I sat up slowly. I was wearing clothes I did not own. A simple tunic and trousers in a silver-gray fabric that felt like silk but warmer. My boots were gone. My jacket was gone. Everything I had been wearing was gone. A door opened in the wall, and it was not a door until it opened, just a seamless section of crystal that separated like curtains. A Selvari male stepped through. He was tall even by their standards, dressed in deep blue robes embroidered with patterns that caught the light. His bioluminescent markings were steady and controlled, a cool blue-white that told me nothing about what he was feeling. "You are awake," he said. His voice was smooth, unhurried, and carried the particular kind of politeness that is indistinguishable from contempt. "How long?" I asked. "6 of your standard days." 6 days. I had been unconscious for 6 days. Where am I? The Royal Medical Sanctum aboard the Throne of Luminance. That stopped me. The Throne of Luminance was the Selvari flagship, the mobile seat of their government. It was not a ship so much as a city wrapped around an engine. I had seen images of it on news feeds. No human had ever set foot on it. "You are the first of your species to be treated in this facility," the Selvari said, as though reading my thoughts. "Our physicians found your biology quite interesting, remarkably resilient for such a short-lived species." "Thank you," I said. "I think." He inclined his head. "I am Lord Consort Valanthos. I am husband to the Queen. I did not know what the proper protocol was for meeting the husband of a galactic sovereign while sitting in what amounted to a hospital gown, so I just nodded." Valanthos studied me the way someone might study an insect pinned to a board. There was curiosity there, but no warmth. "You have created a situation," he said. "I saved a girl from being kidnapped. You saved the Princess Valith Sera, sole heir to the Throne of Luminance, from abduction by Drakari operatives. In doing so, you sustained injuries that brought you to the threshold of death. Twice, according to our physicians, your heart stopped. Twice, it resumed without assistance." He paused. "This has triggered a complication." "A complication?" "In Selvari law, when an individual saves the life of royal blood at the near cost of their own life, a covenant is invoked. It is called the Shale Vithar. In your language, the closest translation would be something like life bound in light. It is an ancient code, the oldest in our legal tradition. It elevates the savior, honors them, and binds them to the royal house until the debt is formally weighed and resolved." I sat with that for a moment. Binds them how? The savior is given a position within the royal household. They are granted protections under our law. They become, in effect, a member of the Queen's extended house. It is considered the highest honor the Dominion can bestow, and it carries with it responsibilities and obligations that cannot be dissolved by simple request. "And if I do not want the honor?" Valanthos looked at me the way one might look at a piece of furniture that had suddenly voiced an opinion. "The Shale Vithar is not a gift that can be refused. It is a state of being. It exists because of what you did, not because of what you choose. You cannot undo saving the princess's life." I stared at him. "You are telling me that I accidentally signed a contract I cannot read, in a language I do not speak, with a government that thinks I am an insect." Something flickered across his bioluminescent marks. Irritation, maybe. "The Shale Vithar is not a contract. It is a sacred covenant. It has not been invoked for a member of the direct royal line in over 3,000 years. And it has never, in the entire history of the Dominion, been invoked by an alien. So what does it mean for me, practically?" "It means you cannot leave." The words landed like stones. I sat there on that impossibly comfortable medical surface in that impossibly beautiful room, and I felt the walls close in. "I want to see my ship," I said. "Your vessel has been secured. You are not permitted to leave the throne of luminance until the Queen has formally addressed the covenant." "And when will that be?" "When the Queen decides." He left. The crystal wall sealed behind him like it had never been open. I tried the walls. I tried every surface. There was no handle, no panel, no seam. The room was a cage made of light and silence, and I was stuck in it. 3 hours later, the wall opened again, and a young Selvari girl walked in. She was carrying a tray of food that glowed faintly, arranged in geometric patterns I did not recognize. Her bioluminescent markings were bright and shifting with rapid colors, and I recognized her immediately. "You are the girl from the corridor," I said. "I am Valith Sarah," she said, setting the tray down with exaggerated care. "But you may call me Sarah. Everyone does, except when they are angry with me, which is often." She sat down on the edge of the medical surface without being invited, folded her long legs beneath her, and looked at me with undisguised fascination. "You are smaller than I remember," she said. "I was standing up last time. And covered in blood. That too." She tilted her head. "Why do you have hair on your arms?" "Evolution. Humans used to be covered in it." "Used to be?" "We lost most of it over a few million years. We kept some. Nobody knows exactly why." Her markings brightened. "Do all humans fight like you do?" "No. Most humans are considerably smarter about avoiding fights." "But you did not avoid it." "No." "Why?" I looked at her, and I thought about Lucy again. About a 12-year-old girl falling in a crowd, and nobody reaching down to help her up. "Because you needed help," I said. "And I was there." Sarah studied me with those silver eyes. Then she reached into the folds of her clothing and pulled out a small device. She pressed something, and a holographic display unfolded in the air between us, showing a rotating model of a human skeleton. "I have been studying your species since you were brought aboard," she said. "Your bones are dense but brittle compared to ours. Your muscles generate force through a different chemical process. You cannot see ultraviolet light. You require sleep for a third of every rotation cycle. You have no natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no bioluminescence, no bioelectric field." She lowered the display and looked at me. "By every biological metric, you should not have survived that fight. The odds were calculated afterward. You had a 4% chance of victory." "That sounds about right," I said. "Then how did you win?" I thought about it. Humans have a saying, "It is not the size of the dog in the fight. It is the size of the fight in the dog." Her markings flickered in confusion. "I do not understand the reference to dogs." "It means that the will to fight matters more than the ability to fight. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest, the toughest, the biggest. But when we decide that something matters, we do not stop. Ever. We are the species that chased its prey across entire continents until it collapsed from exhaustion. We did not outrun it. We outlasted it." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I have read 17 academic studies about humanity. None of them mention that. Academics do not usually get punched in the face by Drakari mercenaries." She almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely a twitch of her lips, but her markings flared bright for a second. Over the next 2 days, Sarah visited me 7 times. She brought food, questions, and an inexhaustible curiosity about every aspect of human existence. She wanted to know about Earth, about oceans, which the Selvari did not have, about rain, about seasons, about human music, which she found chaotic and fascinating, about why humans cooked food with fire when other species found the concept barbaric. "You set your food on fire," she said during one visit, her markings cycling through shades of disbelief. "On purpose. We do not set it on fire. We apply controlled heat. That is setting it on fire with extra steps. It makes the food taste better. How can burning something make it taste better? Trust me on this. If you ever visit Earth, I will make you a grilled cheese sandwich, and you will understand." She asked about human families, about how we raise children, about our lifespans. When I told her that humans typically lived between 80 and 120 years, she went very quiet. The Selvari lived for nearly 1,000. "That is so short," she whispered. Her markings dimmed to a soft blue, the color of sadness. "We make the most of what we get." "How? How do you fit everything in?" "We do not. That is what makes it matter. When you know that time is limited, every moment carries weight. Every choice has urgency. We love hard because we do not have centuries to get around to it." She thought about that for a long time, her markings shifting through colors I was learning to recognize. Purple for contemplation, soft gold for understanding, a faint green that I think meant she was filing the information away for later use. Each visit, I learned something about her in return. She was lonely. Profoundly, achingly lonely. The only child of the most powerful ruler in the Dominion, surrounded at all times by guards and tutors and protocol, and permitted to speak freely to almost no one. Her tutors treated her like a vessel to be filled with knowledge. Her guards treated her like an object to be protected. Nobody treated her like a child. Nobody played games with her, or told her stories, or let her ask silly questions without turning the answer into a lesson. She reminded me so much of Lucy that it hurt in places I thought I had sealed shut years ago. On the third day, I was brought before the Queen. The throne hall of the Luminance was the largest enclosed space I had ever seen. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above, held up by pillars of living crystal that pulsed with slow, rhythmic light. Thousands of Selvari nobles lined the hall in tiered galleries, their markings casting the room in an ever-shifting sea of color. The air hummed with a subsonic frequency that I felt in my teeth and my sternum, like standing inside a cathedral organ. At the far end, on a throne that grew from the floor like a natural formation, sat Queen Ceralias. She was something beyond description. Taller than any Selvari I had seen, her skin a deeper silver that bordered on platinum, and her bioluminescent markings burned with a steady white-gold light that illuminated the space around her like a personal star. She was ancient, and she was powerful, and she was completely unreadable. I walked the length of that hall in borrowed clothes and bare feet, feeling every pair of alien eyes on me, and I kept my back straight, because that was the only thing I had. "Commander Jack Mercer," the Queen said. Her voice carried without amplification, filling the hall with a tone that was neither warm nor cold but absolute. "You stand in the throne hall of the Selvari Dominion. No human has stood here before you. I am aware, Your Majesty. The Shale Vithar has been invoked. You saved my daughter's life at the cost of your own near death. By our oldest law, you are bound to this house until the debt is weighed and balance is found." "Your Majesty," I said, and I kept my voice steady even though my heart was hammering. "I did not save your daughter for a reward or a title. I saved her because she was a child in danger. I respectfully ask to be released. Return my ship. Let me go." Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. I could feel the shock rippling through the galleries. Nobody refused the Queen. Nobody spoke to her as though they had the right to make requests. The Queen studied me. Her markings did not change. Her expression did not shift. "You may not go," she said, and that was the end of the discussion. I was escorted back to my quarters, which had been upgraded from the medical room to an actual suite. It was still a cage, but a comfortable one. I paced. I fumed. I considered and rejected 17 escape plans, all of which ended with me floating in vacuum. That evening, a message arrived. The Queen wished to see me, privately. I was taken to a terrace at the top of the ship, a glass-walled observation platform that looked out onto a nebula so vast and so colorful that it made my chest ache. Purple and gold and deep crimson, with newborn stars glittering in the gas clouds like scattered diamonds. The Queen stood at the edge, alone. No guards, no advisors, just her, tall and luminous against the dark. "Why did you fight for her?" she asked without turning around. "Your species is not known for sacrifice." I stood beside her and looked out at the nebula. "With respect, Your Majesty," I said, "you do not know my species at all." She turned then and looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, not trust, but a fracture in the wall so small that I almost missed it. "Perhaps not," she said quietly. We stood there in silence for a long time. watching stars being born. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. I existed in a space between prisoner and guest that had no name. I had quarters on the throne of luminance that were larger than my entire ship. I had access to libraries containing more knowledge than every human university combined. I was fed food that was exquisite in ways I lacked the vocabulary to describe, and I was watched every moment of every day by guards who were polite and professional and absolutely prepared to stop me if I tried to leave. The luminance itself was staggering. I had seen warships and space stations and orbital platforms, but nothing like this. It was less a vessel and more a living organism that happened to travel through space. The corridors breathed. The walls responded to temperature and mood. The gardens, and there were actual gardens, grew plants from 300 different worlds under simulated sunlight that somehow felt exactly right for each species. I walked through a grove of trees from a world called Thelvaris that grew sideways and bore fruit that tasted like memories. I am not being poetic. The fruit contained a chemical that triggered the taster's strongest positive memory. For me, it was my father cooking breakfast on a Sunday morning, humming a song whose name I never learned. I learned to read the Selvari, not their language, although Sarah was teaching me that too, but the people themselves. Their society was a matriarchy built on 10,000 years of tradition so rigid that it had become invisible, like water to a fish. The queen ruled absolutely, but she was also imprisoned by that absoluteness. Every word she spoke was weighed against precedent. Every decision she made was measured against the decisions of 100 queens before her. She was the most powerful individual in a civilization that spanned 300 star systems, and she could not change the color of her throne room without consulting a committee of historical scholars. The Shael Vithar, I came to understand, was not just an honor. It was a crisis. Having a human, a member of a species the Selvari considered barely above animals, bound to the royal house by sacred law, was a scandal of the highest order. The conservative factions in the court were outraged. The noble houses whispered behind their glowing hands, and at the center of the opposition was Lord Consort Valanthos. Valanthos hated me. Not personally, although I suspect he would not have minded if I stopped breathing. He hated what I represented. He belonged to a political faction called the Purists, who believed the Selvari were the pinnacle of galactic evolution and that all other species existed to serve them. A human who had saved the princess undermined their entire worldview. If a creature they considered inferior could do what the royal sentinels had failed to do, then perhaps the Selvari were not as superior as they believed. That was an idea Valanthos could not allow to exist. He began testing me. Small things at first. Assigning me quarters near the engine core where the vibrations made sleep difficult. Arranging my meal schedule to conflict with Sarah's visits. Ensuring that the libraries I had access to excluded anything related to Selvari military capabilities or political structure. I noticed all of it. Humans are social animals. We evolved reading faces, reading body language, reading the spaces between words. I could not read bioluminescent markings the way a Selvari could, but I could read the way someone stood, the way their breathing changed, the way they moved through a room. I had been reading people my entire life, and Valanthos was broadcasting his intentions like a beacon. I said nothing. I filed it away and I waited. Then Valanthos made his real move. He invoked something called the Trial of Shaelkai, the Proving. It was an ancient tradition tied to the Shael Vithar covenant. Anyone bound by the sacred oath could be challenged to prove their worthiness through a series of tests designed for Selvari warriors. Physical endurance, strategic thinking, moral judgment. No alien had ever faced them because no alien had ever been bound by the Shael Vithar. The court approved it unanimously. Even the queen could not object without appearing to favor me. I was informed of the trial by a sentinel commander named Thyra. She was different from the other Selvari I had met, shorter for her species, which still put her at 7 feet, with markings that shifted between deep blue and violet. She spoke to me without the careful condescension most Selvari used. "You should know what you are facing," Thyra said. "The trials are designed for our physiology, our endurance, our cognitive architecture. Valanthos chose them specifically because he believes you will fail. And if I fail, the court will have grounds to dissolve the Shael Vithar and expel you from the Dominion. So I get to leave? You get to leave in disgrace." Your species gets to be held up as proof that humans are unworthy of standing beside the Selvari. Valanthos will use it to push through isolation policies that will cut humanity off from Dominion trade routes for the next century. I understood then, this was not about me. It never had been. I was a symbol, and what happened to me would determine how an entire civilization treated my species for generations. No pressure. The first trial was the trial of body. It took place in a simulation chamber the size of a stadium, filled with shifting gravity fields, temperature extremes, and terrain that reconfigured itself every few minutes. The objective was simple: cross the chamber, reach the far wall, do not stop. The Selvari expected me to collapse in the first hour. Their own warriors typically completed the course in 3. I will not pretend it was easy. The gravity shifts were disorienting, pulling me sideways and then slamming me flat, and then suddenly dropping to near zero, so I floated helplessly before crashing back to double weight. The temperature swung from freezing to blistering and back. The terrain threw up walls, dropped floors, created obstacles that appeared and vanished without pattern. But here is the thing about humans. We are the persistent species. Every other predator on our home planet was faster than us, stronger than us, better armed than us, and we hunted them to the edge of existence by doing one simple thing. We kept going. We followed our prey for hours, for days, across savannas and through forests, walking and jogging and walking again, never stopping, never resting, until the animal's body overheated and it fell down and could not get up. We are not designed to sprint. We are designed to endure. I told myself that with every step. When the gravity tripled and my legs felt like they were encased in concrete, I kept walking. When the temperature dropped so fast that ice formed on my eyebrows and my fingers went stiff and blue, I kept walking. When the floor opened beneath me and I fell 20 feet into a pool of liquid that was not quite water and not quite acid, and burned my skin in places I did not know I had nerve endings, I climbed out and I kept walking. The Selvari watching from the gallery began to react around the second hour. I could see their markings shifting through the observation windows, cycling through colors that I later learned corresponded to confusion, skepticism, and something close to alarm. Their simulation models had predicted I would fail within 90 minutes. When I passed the 2-hour mark, bleeding from the ears and moving on pure willpower, the algorithms did not know what to do with me. I crossed that chamber in 4 hours and 37 minutes. I was bleeding from the ears when the gravity shifts damaged my inner ear. I had frostbite on 3 fingers and heat blisters on my shoulders. I could barely see through the sweat and the blood, but I reached the far wall and I put my hand on it, and I did not fall down until after I heard the tone that meant the trial was over. The watching court was silent. Valanthos's markings were dark with fury. The second trial was the trial of mind, a strategic simulation, a war game against an artificial intelligence that had been designed to replicate the decision-making patterns of the Dominion's greatest military commanders. I sat in a control chamber surrounded by holographic displays, and I commanded a simulated fleet against an enemy that adapted to every strategy in real time. The Selvari approach warfare like chess. Every move is elegant, considered, and built upon a framework of doctrine that has been refined over millennia. Their strategies are beautiful. They are also predictable. I did not play chess. I played poker. In the first hour I made a series of seemingly random moves that the AI classified as errors. I sacrificed ships in positions that made no strategic sense. I consolidated forces in locations that had no tactical value. I split my fleet into groups that were too small to be effective, and sent them on routes that any first-year tactics student would identify as suicidal. The AI, programmed to analyze and exploit patterns, focused on the pattern of my errors. It allocated resources to counter what it predicted would be my next mistake. It moved its defensive fleet to block routes that my sacrificed ships had opened up, treating those openings as traps rather than genuine tactical blunders. There was no pattern. The errors were not traps. They were bait. While the AI was chasing my sacrificial ships, I had been mapping its response time. Every action I took, I was not measuring the strategic outcome. I was measuring how long the AI took to react, where it moved first, and where it moved last. I was learning its priorities. I was learning what it protected and what it was willing to give up. In the second hour, I launched a coordinated attack from 5 directions simultaneously, using the sacrificed ships as debris screens and the seemingly pointless consolidation as a hidden reserve fleet. The AI had been analyzing my mistakes instead of my intentions. By the time it recalculated, I had already punched through its defensive grid and was running a flanking maneuver that I had borrowed from an ancient Earth admiral who won a naval battle by deliberately sailing his ships into the enemy's line. I won the simulation in 2 hours and 43 minutes. The projected time for a Selvari commander was 3.5 hours. I was faster because I cheated, and I cheated because nobody told me I could not. The court murmured. Something had shifted. Not admiration exactly, but the beginning of a grudging reassessment. The third trial was the trial of spirit. This was the moral test. I was placed in a simulation that presented me with a scenario. A city under siege, civilians trapped, 2 paths to victory. The first was fast and efficient, and required me to sacrifice a group of simulated innocents to destroy the enemy position. The second was slow, difficult, and would cost me nearly everything, but nobody would die. Every Selvari warrior who had taken this trial in the last 1,000 years had chosen the first path. The trial had been redesigned over the centuries to reward ruthlessness, to test whether a warrior could make the cold calculation. It was considered a measure of strength. I chose the second path. It nearly destroyed me. The simulation punished the choice at every turn. I lost resources. I lost time. I lost tactical position. The enemy pressed in, and I was pushed back to the edge of defeat. But I held. I found a third option that the simulation had not anticipated. A way to evacuate the civilians, through a route I created, by collapsing a section of the terrain, turning the enemy's own advance into a bottleneck. It was ugly. It was desperate. It cost me everything I had built, but nobody died who did not have to. When the simulation ended, there was a pause, a long pause. Then a Selvari scholar in the viewing gallery stood up and said something in Old Selvari that I did not understand. Thyra translated for me later. He said that you passed the trial as it was originally intended, before it was corrupted. The trial of spirit was not designed to test ruthlessness. It was designed to test mercy. The court was divided. I could see it in their markings, the swirling debate of color that filled the galleries. Some were angry. Some were confused. Some, a small number, were genuinely impressed. Valanthos looked like he wanted to set me on fire with his eyes. Sarah found me afterward in my quarters. She threw her arms around my waist, and her markings burned bright gold, which I had learned was the Selvari expression of joy. You did it, she said. You actually did it. I did not die, I corrected her. That is not quite the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. That night, the Queen summoned me. Not to the terrace this time, but to a private chamber deep in the heart of the luminance, a room lined with images of every queen who had come before her. Hundreds of faces, thousands of years, all watching from the walls. Saralius stood among them, and she looked tired, not physically. Selvari do not show physical fatigue the way humans do. But there was a dimness to her markings, a weight in her eyes that I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror. I watched every trial, she said. I assumed you would. You have earned my attention, Commander Mercer. Very few beings in this galaxy can say that. I was not trying to earn anything. I know. That is precisely why you earned it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. The investigation into my daughter's kidnapping has uncovered something deeper than we expected. The Drakari who attacked her were not independent. They were hired. The funding came from within the Dominion, from within this court. I felt my stomach tighten. Someone in your own government tried to take your daughter. Yes. Her markings flickered, a momentary break in her control. I have 10,000 guards, Commander. I have intelligence networks that span 300 systems, and none of them kept my daughter safe. You did. She turned to me, and I saw it then, beneath the power and the light and the millennia of royal bearing. Fear, raw, maternal, desperate fear. Will you guard my daughter? She asked. Not a command, a question. From a queen who was also a mother who had nearly lost her only child. I understood then why she would not let me go. It was not tradition, it was not law, it was not politics. She was terrified of what would happen to Sarah if I was not there. I looked at the most powerful woman in the galaxy, and I saw my own mother. The year Lucy got sick before the riots, sitting by a hospital bed, holding a hand she could not heal. Power does not cure fear. It just gives you a bigger room to pace in. Yes, I said, I will guard her. The Queen closed her eyes. Her markings dimmed to almost nothing, and for just a second, she looked like any mother in the galaxy who had been told her child would be safe. I settled into life aboard the throne of luminance, the way water settles into the cracks of a stone. Slowly, unevenly, and in ways that nobody quite anticipated. My official title was Guardian of the Princess, which sounded grand but mostly involved walking Sarah to her lessons, sitting through her tutoring sessions on galactic diplomacy, and playing cards with her in the Crystal Gardens when the court's attention was elsewhere. She had developed a consuming fascination with human games, particularly poker, which she was terrible at because her bioluminescent markings gave away every bluff. "Your face is glowing orange," I told her one afternoon, as she tried to convince me she had a strong hand. "That means nothing," she said, her markings burning brighter. "It means you are lying." She threw her cards at me. They fluttered through the low-gravity garden like silver butterflies. But beneath the quiet moments, the investigation was consuming every hour I had. Thyra and I had formed an alliance that neither of us had expected. She was brilliant, disciplined, and fiercely loyal to the Queen. She was also the only Sentinel who treated me as an equal from the beginning. "You see things we miss," she told me one evening, as we reviewed security logs in her office. "Your species reads behavior differently. You pick up on patterns that our analysts overlook because they are trained to focus on data, not instinct." "Humans spent 100,000 years surviving by reading each other," I said. "It is the one advantage we have. We can tell when the herd is uneasy." I had been watching the court closely, and things did not add up. There was a noble named Thalaris who attended every council session but never spoke. She positioned herself near the exit, and her markings stayed flat and controlled, never reacting to even the most heated debates. In a species that communicated emotion through light, that level of control was either extraordinary discipline or a deliberate mask. There was a shift in the Sentinel rotation schedule that had been filed 3 weeks before the kidnapping attempt. 2 guards who normally covered the lower levels of Valethar Station had been reassigned to cargo inspections on the far side of the station. The corridor where Sarah was attacked had been left unmonitored during exactly the window when the Drakari made their move. There was a supply requisition for a type of communications equipment that was not listed in any Dominion military inventory. It had been ordered through a shell account, routed through 4 intermediary vendors, and delivered to a private dock that was registered to a company that did not exist. Each piece alone meant nothing. Together, they drew a line that pointed in a direction I did not want to look. "It is Valanthos," I told Thyra. She was quiet for a long time. "That is a serious accusation. The rotation change was authorized by someone with override access to the Sentinel command structure. Only 4 people have that access. The Queen, you, the head of Palace Intelligence, and the Lord Consort. The shell company that received the communications equipment was registered on the same day that Valanthos attended a diplomatic meeting on Drakari territory. A meeting that was supposed to be about trade agreements. Supposed to be. I pulled the communication logs from that day. There is a 6-hour gap in his personal relay traffic. 6 hours of silence from the consort of the Queen, on a hostile station, in the middle of a diplomatic meeting. Thyra's markings went dark. In Selvari body language, that meant dread. "If you are right," she said slowly, "then the threat to the princess is not external. It is sleeping beside the Queen. I know. We need proof. Absolute proof. If we accuse the Lord Consort without evidence that is beyond challenge, the purist faction will use it as grounds for civil unrest." We spent the next 3 weeks building a case. Thyra worked the military channels while I worked the human angle, reading people, following behavioral threads, and asking questions that nobody expected a human to ask. I spoke to servants and maintenance workers and cargo handlers. I visited the lower decks where the powerful never went. I listened, and I talked to the Queen. Our conversations had become something neither of us had planned. She would summon me to the terrace, or the private chamber, or the gardens, and we would talk. Not about the investigation, although I updated her regularly. About everything else. She asked me about Earth. I told her the truth. I told her about the wars and the famines and the environmental collapse that nearly ended us. I told her about the colony riots and Lucy. I told her about the century of rebuilding that followed, how humans crawled out of the wreckage of their own stupidity and started over. Your species is remarkably self-destructive, she said. Yes, but we are also remarkably good at surviving our own self-destruction. We set our house on fire and then invented firefighting. We poisoned our oceans and then figured out how to clean them. We split the atom and used it to power cities. Every catastrophe we create, we eventually overcome. Not because we are wise, because we refuse to accept the consequences of our own foolishness. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is either admirable or insane. It is both. That is the human condition." She almost laughed. Not quite. The Queen did not laugh, but there was a vibration in her markings that served the same purpose. A brief, involuntary flash of something bright and warm. "Your species fights each other constantly," she said during another conversation. "Your historical records are catalogs of conflict. Yes, and yet you cooperate. You build civilizations that span planets. You create art and music and science even while you are destroying each other. How do you reconcile the two?" I thought about it. We do not reconcile them. We hold both truths at the same time. Humans are capable of extraordinary cruelty and extraordinary kindness, and often the same person contains both. We do not have the luxury of being one thing. We are everything, all at once, always in conflict with ourselves. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it also means we are never boring. She began sharing things with me in return. The fractures she saw forming in the Dominion, the isolationist policies that were weakening their economy, the purist factions' growing influence, the weight of ruling an empire that stretched across light years while sitting on a throne that felt smaller every year. "I have 10,000 advisors," she told me one evening. "They tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me what you actually think. Is that a complaint?" It is the highest compliment I have ever given to any being. I realized then that we had something in common, the Queen and I. We were both alone. She was surrounded by thousands and trusted none of them. I was the only human in a civilization that considered me an oddity at best. We were two people on opposite ends of the power spectrum, who had somehow found in each other the one thing neither of us had: honesty. The investigation came to a head on a day I will never forget. It was the Festival of First Light, the most important ceremony in the Selvari calendar. It commemorated the founding of the Dominion, and every noble house, every military commander, every significant figure in the empire gathered in the Grand Hall for a night of ritual and celebration. The Queen presided from the throne, Sarah beside her in formal ceremonial dress, her young markings glowing with excitement. I stood at the edge of the hall in my guardian's position, watching the crowd. Thyra was on the opposite side. We had shared a look when the festivities began. We both felt it. Something was wrong. The air was charged with a tension that had nothing to do with ceremony. At precisely the 8th hour, 3 things happened simultaneously. The lights in the Grand Hall flickered and died. An alarm screamed through the ship's emergency channels, a sound I had only heard once before, on Valithar Station, the night I found Sarah in that corridor. And in the darkness, I heard weapons fire. I moved before I thought. I grabbed Sarah by the arm and pulled her off the dais, shielding her with my body as energy bolts streaked through the space where she had been sitting. The crowd erupted into chaos, nobles screaming, guards shouting, the beautiful ceremony collapsing into pandemonium. "Stay low," I told Sarah. "Stay behind me. Do not let go of my hand." "Jack," she whispered, "I am scared." "I know. I have got you." I pulled her through the crowd, using my body as a shield, and my eyes as weapons, scanning every shadow and every face. The advantage humans have in chaos is that we are used to it. Our entire history is chaos. We are born into noise and conflict and unpredictability, and we learn to move through it the way fish learn to swim. Every other species in that hall was frozen with shock. I was already 3 steps ahead of the situation. I could see figures moving in the darkness. Sentinel armor, but wrong. The markings were different. These were soldiers who had been turned, loyalists wearing the uniform of the Queen's Guard who now served a different master. 2 of them came for us. They materialized out of the shadows with weapons raised, and I did the only thing I could do. I put myself between them and Sarah, and I fought. I grabbed a ceremonial blade off a wall display. It was decorative, not designed for actual combat, but it was metal, and it had an edge, and that was enough. The first turned sentinel swung at me, and I ducked under the strike, came up inside his guard, and drove the pommel of the blade into his throat. He staggered, and I kicked his legs out from under him. The second was faster. She caught me across the shoulder with an energy discharge that felt like being hit with a lightning bolt compressed into a fist. My left arm went numb. I switched the blade to my right hand and charged her before she could fire again, closing the distance so her ranged weapon was useless. I hit her with everything I had, blade and fist and shoulder, and she went down. I pulled Sarah through the chaos to a security corridor. There was a panic room at the end, a reinforced chamber designed to protect the royal family in exactly this kind of situation. I got her inside, sealed the door, and checked that the room's independent life support was active. The walls were solid, the locks were engaged, and the room could sustain her for days if necessary. Sarah grabbed my arm. Her markings were white with terror, pulsing in rapid waves that I had never seen before. White was beyond fear. White was the color of a child who understood that the world was not safe, and might never be safe again. "Do not leave me," she said. "I have to. Please." My heart was breaking. This girl, this child who had wormed her way into every defended space in my soul, was looking at me with the same eyes Lucy had the last time I saw her, the same plea, "Do not leave me. Stay." "Sarah, listen to me. Your mother is out there. Thyra is out there. Good people are fighting for you right now, and they need help. You could die. I could. But if I stay in this room while people die for me, I would not be the person you think I am." She stared at me. Then she let go of my arm. "Come back," she said. "I promise." I sealed the panic room and I ran toward the sound of fighting. The throne hall was a battleground. Thyra and her loyal sentinels were holding a defensive line around the queen, who had been pulled from the throne and was being shielded behind a wall of armored bodies. But they were outnumbered. Valanthos had planned this carefully. Enough turned sentinels to overwhelm the loyal guards. Enough confusion to prevent reinforcements from reaching the hall in time. The hall that had been so beautiful an hour ago was now scarred with energy burns and scattered with overturned ceremonial furniture. The crystal pillars still pulsed with their ancient light, but now that light illuminated a scene of chaos. Nobles had fled or taken cover behind the gallery railings. The subsonic hum that had filled the hall was drowned out by the sharp crack of energy weapons and the clash of bodies. I came in from a side entrance and threw myself into the fight. I had the ceremonial blade and nothing else. No armor, no energy weapon, no backup. Just a human being with a sharp piece of metal and a decision that had already been made. I fought alongside Thyra's soldiers, and I could see the shock in their eyes when I appeared. They had dismissed me 100 times. They had looked through me, around me, past me. But here I was, bleeding and bruised, and fighting with a ferocity that they had no framework for. Humans do not fight like Selvari. Selvari combat is precise, elegant, almost beautiful. Every movement flows from centuries of refined martial doctrine. Humans fight dirty. We use the environment. We improvise. We grab whatever is within reach and turn it into a weapon. I overturned a ceremonial table and used it as cover. I threw a crystal vase at an attacker's head. I pulled a tapestry off the wall and tangled a turned sentinel in it. I kicked a chair into the legs of another and followed up with the blade before she could recover. One of the turned sentinels cornered me against a pillar, and I did something that no Selvari warrior would ever consider. I grabbed his weapon arm with both hands, wedged my feet against the pillar, and levered my entire body weight backward. The angle was wrong for him to compensate, and his arm extended past its comfortable range. He released the weapon reflexively, and I caught it as it fell. I did not know how to fire it, so I used it as a club. And I took damage that would have stopped a Selvari warrior cold. A blade cut across my thigh. An energy discharge burned my side. A blow to the head that made the world go sideways for 3 terrible seconds. I kept going. Not because I was tough, not because I was brave, because I refused to stop. I reached the queen. She was conscious but weakened, her markings dim and flickering. I could see the traces of something wrong, a discoloration around her mouth and hands. Poison, Thyra said grimly, fighting beside me. In the ceremonial drink, we neutralized it, but she is compromised. Valanthos appeared then. He strode through the carnage like he owned it, which in his mind he did. His markings blazed with righteous fury, and he was flanked by 4 of his strongest supporters. He looked at the chaos he had created and he spoke, not to the queen, but to the court. This is what happens when we allow contamination, he said, when we let lesser species into our sacred spaces. The Dominion was built by Selvari, for Selvari. It is time we remembered that. He looked at me and his contempt was absolute. The human, still standing, still bleeding on our floors, how perfectly fitting. I did not give a speech. I did not deliver a clever retort. I crossed the distance between us, and I hit him in the jaw with a right hook that had 37 years of human stubbornness behind it. The impact shattered something in my hand. I felt bones break. I did not care. Valanthos staggered back, shocked. No one had ever struck him. He recovered quickly, and he came at me with the trained precision of a Selvari warrior, which is to say he was faster, stronger, and more skilled than me in every measurable way. He hit me and I went down. He hit me again, and I tasted blood. He drove a knee into my chest, and I felt a rib crack. I got up. He hit me again. Harder, a blow to the side of my head that made the world ring like a bell. I got up. He was stronger. He was faster. He was better. None of that mattered, because I was not fighting to win. I was fighting to survive long enough for one opening. One moment when his guard dropped, when his certainty that he was superior made him careless. It came when he paused to speak. Warriors who monologue always make the same mistake. They assume the person they are beating is listening. I was not listening. I was counting his breathing. When he inhaled to speak, I drove forward with everything I had left. I got inside his reach, hooked my leg behind his, and brought us both to the ground. On the floor, his height and reach advantage disappeared. I wrapped my arms around his neck, locked my hands together, despite the broken bones screaming in my right fist, and I held on. He thrashed. He hit me. He clawed at my arms. I held on. Humans, I said through gritted teeth and blood and pain, do not. Let go. Thyra's soldiers overwhelmed his remaining supporters. Loyal sentinels flooded the hall from the reinforcement corridors. Valanthos's people were surrounded, outmatched, and done. I released my hold and rolled off him. I could not stand. I could not feel my right hand. I could barely see through the blood in my eyes. Thyra stood over me and looked down with an expression I had never seen on a Selvari face before. Later, she told me her markings had gone solid gold, the color of awe. "You are the most stubborn creature I have ever encountered," she said. "Thank you," I whispered, and then the world went dark. I am told that I died 3 times in the medical bay. My heart stopped. It restarted. It stopped again. It restarted again. The Selvari physicians later published a paper about it. They called it the human refusal. This phenomenon where a human body that has sustained damage far beyond survivable limits simply refuses to acknowledge the fact that it should be dead. I think it is simpler than that. I had made a promise to a little girl. I told her I would come back, and my body, battered and broken and burned, decided that breaking a promise was not an option. I woke up 12 days later in the same crystal room where this whole journey had begun. The ceiling was the same. The shifting light was the same. The smell of rain on cedar was the same. But everything else had changed. Sarah was asleep in a chair beside my bed. She was holding my hand, just like she had in that corridor on Valathar Station, the very first time. Her markings glowed soft and steady, the color of peace. The queen stood in the doorway. Her markings were dim, the Selvari expression of deep emotion held carefully in check. She said nothing. She just looked at me, and at her daughter, and at my hand in her daughter's grip. Then she turned and walked away. I found out later what had happened while I was unconscious. Valanthos had been stripped of his title and imprisoned along with every conspirator they could identify. The purist faction had been dismantled, its leaders arrested, its influence shattered. The court had been purged. Thyra had been promoted to commander of the Royal Guard, and I, apparently, had become the most talked-about person in the Selvari Dominion. I hated that part. "You are famous," Sarah told me when I was well enough to sit up and eat. "There are 17 songs about you already. They are terrible. They rhyme your name with things that do not make sense. I do not want to be famous." Too late. You punched the Lord Consort in the face in front of the entire court. There is no coming back from that. The physicians told me I had suffered injuries that should have been fatal. Multiple organ damage, blood loss that exceeded what the Selvari thought a human body could survive, fractures in my ribs and hand and skull, and nerve damage from the energy discharges. They had repaired everything, but they did not pretend to understand how I had stayed alive long enough for them to do it. "Your species," the chief physician said, shaking her head in something between admiration and exasperation, "is medically unreasonable." I recovered slowly. This time there was no urgency, no trial, no conspiracy closing in. Just quiet days in the crystal room, with Sarah reading to me in Selvari, and arguing about poker strategy, and bringing me food that she insisted I try, even when it glowed in colors that food should not glow in. She also brought me news from the court. She had taken to gathering intelligence with an enthusiasm that was both impressive and slightly alarming for a child her age. "The noble house of Threlvane has petitioned the Queen to establish a cultural exchange program with human universities," she told me one morning, perched on the edge of my bed with her legs tucked beneath her. "They want to study your art, particularly your music. They find it structurally chaotic, but emotionally complex." That is a polite way of saying they think it is a mess. That is what Thyra said, but she also said she listened to something called jazz last night, and could not stop. Jazz will do that to you. The House of Valaris wants to study human medicine. Apparently your field surgery techniques are of interest. Something about how your doctors can improvise treatments without access to advanced technology. We had a lot of practice. When you spend most of your history without advanced technology, you get creative. Sarah paused, her markings shifting to a thoughtful blue. "Jack, why do humans invent so much? I have been studying the timeline of your technological development, and it is absurd. You went from ground-based flight to walking on your moon in 66 years. It took us 900. "Urgency," I said. "When you only live 100 years, you cannot afford to take 900 years to figure out flight. Everything we do is driven by the knowledge that we are running out of time." That makes me sad. It makes us productive. The court had changed. Nobles who had sneered at me now inclined their heads when Sarah wheeled me through the corridors in a mobility chair that she drove with reckless enthusiasm and terrible steering. Sentinel warriors who had dismissed me as a curiosity saluted as I passed. Thyra's soldiers had started calling me something in Old Selvari that roughly translated to the one who does not fall. "It is not accurate," I told Thyra. "I fall constantly. I just get back up." That is why it is impressive, Jack. 3 weeks after I woke up, the Queen summoned me to the Crystal Terrace. It was evening by the ship's artificial cycle, and the nebula outside had shifted. New colors had emerged, blues and greens threading through the familiar purples and golds. Stars that had been invisible a month ago were now burning bright, newborns finding their light. Sarah Leah stood where she always stood, at the edge of the terrace, looking out at the universe she ruled over. But she looked different. Not smaller. A queen could never look small, but more present, more real. The rigid formality that she wore like armor had softened. Not much, but enough that I could see the person beneath the title. "The Shalvithar can be dissolved," she said without preamble. "You have more than repaid any debt the Covenant could calculate. You saved my daughter's life. You saved my life. You exposed a conspiracy that threatened the foundation of my government. The scales are balanced. You are free." She turned to face me. "Your ship has been repaired. It has been upgraded with Dominion technology that will make it the fastest cargo hauler in human space. Your hold is full of goods that will make you wealthy by human standards. You can leave today if you wish." I looked out at the nebula, and I thought about the Nomad, about my old life, about the cargo routes, and the empty cockpit, and the freedom of being nobody special, answerable to no one, responsible for nothing. Then the Queen spoke again. Or you can stay. I looked at her. Not as a prisoner, not as an obligation, as the guardian of my daughter and as my counselor, a position that I am creating because it needs to exist, and because you are the only person in 300 star systems who I trust to fill it. Her markings flickered. I had learned enough to read them now. That flicker was vulnerability. It cost her everything to show it. My daughter has not had nightmares since you arrived, she said. My court listens when you speak because you tell them truths they need to hear. I have made better decisions in the past months because I had someone in the room who was willing to disagree with me without an agenda. She paused. You have no faction, Commander Mercer. No political ambition. No dynasty to protect. You have only your judgment and your courage. I have 10,000 advisors. I have no one I trust. I did not answer immediately. I walked the corridors of the Luminance that night, alone with my thoughts. The ship hummed around me, alive and vast and filled with beings who had gone from viewing me as an insect to viewing me as something they did not have a word for. I found myself in the docking bay where the Nomad sat. My ship, my old life, rebuilt and upgraded and gleaming with Selvari technology that made it unrecognizable. I walked up the ramp and sat in the cockpit, and I put my hands on the controls. They felt familiar and foreign at the same time, like going back to a childhood home and finding that the rooms are smaller than you remembered. I thought about freedom, about the stars, about the open lanes between systems where a man and his ship could disappear and never be found. I thought about the simplicity of my old life, the clean loneliness of cargo runs between stations, the satisfaction of a job completed, and a hold emptied, and a paycheck deposited. Nobody depending on me, nobody expecting anything from me, nobody who would notice if I did not come back. And that was the thing, was it not? Nobody would notice. That was not freedom. That was just absence. I thought about Sarah, teaching her card games in the Crystal Garden. The way she laughed, a sound like chimes in a wind that smelled like rain. The way she grabbed my hand when she was scared, and did not let go until she was not scared anymore. The way she had fallen asleep beside my bed, and stayed there for 12 days because she refused to leave. The way she asked me questions about Earth as though my home planet was the most fascinating place in the universe, and the way her markings glowed gold when I told her stories about oceans and mountains and thunderstorms. I thought about Thyra, who had stood beside me in a fight that was not hers and never wavered, who had treated me as an equal before anyone else did, who had called me the one who does not fall and meant it. I thought about the Queen, sitting alone on a throne surrounded by 10,000 people, and trusted by none of them, carrying the weight of 300 worlds on shoulders that never shook, because she could not afford to let them. A mother who had almost lost her child, and a ruler who had almost lost her empire, and a woman who had looked at me, a human, a mayfly, and said the word trust, as though it cost her everything she had. I thought about Lucy. I thought about what I wished someone had done for her, what I wished I had been there to do. Freedom is the thing every human says they want, but we are also the species that builds homes, that joins causes, that adopts strays, and takes in orphans and fights for people we met 5 minutes ago. We do not just want to be free. We want to belong to something worth staying for. I went to the Queen the next morning. I will stay, I said, but I have conditions. Her markings brightened. Name them. I will not bow. You are not my queen. You are my employer. Accepted. I want communication channels opened with Earth and human space. Full diplomatic access. Your people have been treating mine like they do not matter. That ends. That will require negotiation with the noble houses. Then negotiate. A pause. Accepted. I want Sarah educated about all the galaxy's peoples, not just the Selvari, humans, Drakari, every species. She is going to rule this dominion someday, and she needs to understand the beings she will be responsible for. That is a significant departure from tradition. Good. Your traditions nearly got her killed. The Queen looked at me for a long moment, and then something happened that I had not seen before. The corners of her mouth shifted. It was not quite a smile, not by human standards, but for a being who had controlled every expression for centuries, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Accepted, she said. All of it. The diplomatic ripple started within weeks. When word reached human space that a former cargo hauler was serving as guardian and counselor in the Selvari court, the United Nations Space Command nearly had a collective heart attack. Ambassador Claire Weston, the first human diplomat to set foot on the throne of luminance, told me afterward that she had received her assignment while eating lunch and had choked on her coffee. "You understand," she said, looking around the crystal corridors with wide eyes, "that you accidentally started a new chapter in human-alien relations. I punched a man in the face and almost died a few times. I am not sure that qualifies as diplomacy." You would be surprised. Trade agreements followed, cultural exchanges, scientific partnerships. The Selvari, it turned out, had a great deal to learn from human medicine, particularly our understanding of improvisation and field surgery. Humans, in turn, gained access to Selvari biotechnology that advanced our medical science by decades. Other species took notice. The Drakari, shaken by the exposure of their syndicate's involvement in the conspiracy, opened formal negotiations for the first time in a century. Smaller civilizations that had been caught between the major powers began reaching out to both human and Selvari representatives, sensing an opportunity for alliances that had been impossible before. The first human trade vessel docked at a Selvari station 3 months after my appointment. The captain, a woman named Hannah Price from the Neptune corridor, told me she had been greeted with actual courtesy by the docking officials. No condescension, no hostility, just professional welcome. "I almost fell out of my chair," she said. "They are not perfect," I told her, "but they are trying. And for a species that does not change easily, trying counts for a lot." I watched from the crystal terrace as her ship departed, its running lights blinking against the nebula, and I thought about how strange the universe is. How a single moment, a single decision, made by a single person who had no plan and no weapon, and no reason to believe he would survive, could ripple outward across star systems and change the shape of civilizations. Somehow, a broke cargo hauler with a broken ship had accidentally become humanity's first real diplomat. My dad would have laughed himself sick. Sarah found me on the crystal terrace on what I had come to think of as our evening. The nebula was particularly beautiful that night, awash in colors that humans do not have names for, but that the Selvari call the breath of creation. She stood beside me and her markings glowed with a steady, warm light. Peace, contentment, the glow of a child who felt safe and knew she was loved. "Will you really stay?" she asked. I looked down at her, and for the first time in this entire insane, terrifying, impossible journey, I smiled. Not a grimace, not a mask, a real smile, the kind that starts somewhere deep in your chest and works its way out. "Kid," I said, "I walked into a fight with 3 Drakari for you. You think a little thing like the entire galaxy is going to chase me off?" She took my hand. Her fingers were cool and long, and they fit perfectly in mine, the way they had from the very first time. We stood there together, the human and the princess, watching stars being born. The galaxy thinks humanity is fragile, short-lived, reckless, and honestly, they are right. We are all of those things. We live brief lives, and we fill them with noise and chaos and passion that burns so bright it scares the species who measure their existence in millennia. But we are also the species that crossed an ocean in wooden boats, not knowing what was on the other side. We split the atom, walked on the moon, and colonized Mars with duct tape and stubbornness. We love too hard, fight too long, care too much, and absolutely refuse to stay down. Hit us and we get up. Hit us again and we get up again. Hit us 1,000 times and we will get up 1,001, bloody and bruised and grinning, because the universe has not yet built the thing that can keep a human on the ground when they have a reason to stand. We are the species that looks at a burning building and runs inside. The species that adopts orphaned animals from other planets. The species that teaches alien children card games and tells them bedtime stories about blue skies and green fields on a world 1,000 light-years away. We are not the strongest, or the smartest, or the longest-lived. But we are the most stubborn, the most caring, the most relentlessly, irrationally hopeful creatures the galaxy has ever produced. The Selvari live for centuries. They think in millennia. They build empires that span star systems, and they measure their worth by the permanence of their legacy. but they had never met anything like us. And now that they have, they do not want to let us go. Honestly, I am okay with that.